But I actually got introduced beauty first approach to the Orthodox Church. So before anything was argued into me, I saw that there was like, oh my gosh, there's this language here.
About a group of us that meet early in the morning, and not everybody knows it's special. My Rock 105's Graide.
Little bits of death and fasting and praying when I don't want to. These are the overlooked categories of beauty. People don't understand that, like, as a Christian, if you're going to be the salt of the earth, that means you have to have your head around death. Salt comes from death, if you want to understand how it exists in the natural world, in the sense that pure water comes down from heaven, like Revelation. It has life, it has logos, it has nutrition, it has things that can sustain your body and your life and the world and all the things in the world. Well, as it comes down into the world, it starts to pick up all the imperfections of the world, all the dirt of the world. It eventually becomes polluted to the point you can no longer drink it. It's no longer potable. You know, in the Bible, they always use the abyss, these waters, like the undrinkable waters, as an example of hell. The contemplation of death is such an important thing, and it's been so lost. Memento Mori, you have to understand you're going to die, and you're going, if you don't come to terms with your own death, you're going to try to cover it up all kinds of ways. You're going to try to dye your hair. You're going to try to get hair transplants. You're going to get cosmetic surgery. You're going to get boob jobs. There's definitely a lot of hope in beauty. So I would say that people should use beauty to find hope.
You blew me away, man. Welcome to the show, my dear brothers and sisters. You're about to watch an amazing interview that I had the pleasure of recording with Neil from Dirt Poor Robins. If you're unfamiliar with Dirt Poor Robins, you need to get familiar ASAP, right away. You can find all the links in our description. Let me just tell you my description of the sound of this amazing band. It's cabaret, steampunk, vaudeville, meets Pink Floyd with a smash of Tim Burton through the eyes of Saint Paisios. All right. In this conversation, Neil and I covered a lot of ground, but let me just say that I really enjoyed this conversation for many reasons. As a musician, I love Neil's insight on how music affects you, affects him, what it is that we do as musicians, the stories we tell, the why we tell the story, where do songs come from? What is a song? And how does it connect and relate to the beautiful faith we are both a part of? We're both Orthodox Christians, so of course we're giving you this perspective from an Orthodox Christian lens. Now buckle in, my dear brothers and sisters. You're in for an amazing ride. Here is the episode with the wonderful and amazing Neil DeGray from Dirt Poor Robins. All right, we are currently live. With me today, I'm very excited for this conversation with my dear brother Neil, who's half of Dirt Poor Robins. He's joining me today. Welcome to the show, Neil.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Been wanting to have you on for a little while now. We spin your music on my radio show on SOS Radio often. My audience definitely knows who you are. But before we get into the nitty gritty, I believe it's very common for all us humans to have connections to the past, our parents, our grandparents, this and that. And a lot of those things dictate our careers, our lives, our development, positive, negative, all of that stuff. It seems that you have a track record. Your family has a track record of entertainment, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
Yeah. No, my parents were both professional entertainers. My dad had a radio show. It was the number one radio show in Southern New England. He had the number one morning show when I was a kid. And my mother was a jazz singer, and she sang at church and all those kind of things. But she was a professional singer. She was pretty incredible. And so we kind of grew up in a little bit of a strange world, because my dad was a local celebrity, and I was in a family. Okay, go ahead.
Pause you right there.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
Please.
Let me see if this works here.
Think about a group of us that meet early in the morning, and not everybody knows it's special. My Rock 105's Graide. Our 5:30 club is underway. Our question is coming up, and our weather is going to be absolutely beautiful.
Just like his father, Gene DeGrade, Gary DeGrade's broadcasting career in Rhode Island has spanned more than 5 decades.
Okay, did that backfire, or is that your father and your grandfather?
That's definitely my dad and my grandfather. Both of them were radio announcers, and that's really funny. Where'd you find that, on YouTube somewhere?
Yeah, I scoured. It took me a while.
Great.
It was very difficult to find.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of people had a lot of great things to say about your dad, by the way. Like I read some really interesting articles. One lady was mentioning how your father had a way of lightening up the darkest of days, she said.
Oh, wow. Well, that's a nice compliment. My dad had a pretty much a radical transformation during his professional career. Maybe people on the outside didn't notice, but he was like a very functional, like alcoholic, drug abuser, and had radically turned around from that when I was in my teens. And so he really dedicated a lot of his career and his help extracurricular outside of work to helping people get off drugs and alcohol and finding God. So he was, a dramatically different figure from where his career started out into where his career ended when he retired.
Oh, that's beautiful. Was it his, coming back to Christianity that helped him along the way? How did that fit in? Because you mentioned his faith.
Yeah. So both my parents grew up. We were in a predominantly Catholic part of the country, and they had grown up Catholic. And they tried to, I guess, once they had kids, they tried to make a go of it. My mom would sing at Catholic church, and we tried to go on most Sundays, but that kind of petered out by the time I was a teenager. And what had happened is that we had an uncle who ran this kind of non-denominational, sort of charismatic kind of Pentecostal church. Mm-hmm. And he, my brother and I actually started going because he invited us because there was this youth group that had only girls in it. And he's like, yeah, I need some guys here. And that was like his proselytization trick to get us to go and be part of the youth group. So we did that. And then my dad, who had just gotten into recovery, in part of the recovery program is you have to pick a higher power. And so he grew up Catholic, and he was like, well, Christ is going to be my higher power. And then he actually started to come to church with us. And so that became a big part of, a phrase they would use in those circles, like your testimony, yes. Which I think I'm totally fine with that phrase. I'm not judging it at all. But the idea of like, hey, where was he before he met Christ, and where was he after, and what changed, and could you have that change yourself too?
Oh, yeah, that's beautiful. And so would you say that that was your first introduction into Christianity, the faith in general?
Yeah, I don't know, man. It was always there in the background. I had these intrusive Christian thoughts, I'd call them, where I think I was around church enough. Like when we were very little, we didn't go at all. And then when I was around 3 or 4, we started to go. And it was all very strange to me at first. I had it was just one weird, I'm an artist and I grew up in an artist family. So some of my perspectives will be maybe strange, but I couldn't figure out why they had a guy nailed to the wall and why this was why we were all going to this building. It was a really it was a beautifully carved crucifix at the church I was in. I couldn't figure that out. And then the people who would sit near me would weird me out. I had some of those, I don't know, maybe I'm neurodivergent is what a modern person would call it. I remember just the first time I was at church, there was a guy with a mole in his ear, and I could not stop looking at it. And that was it was so strange, but that the art was beautiful. And there was something haunting in the air. There was something, a reverence that wasn't in the rest of the world that was really attractive to me. And I think that kind of stuck with me. There were parts of the year where we would do a passion play, like on Good Friday. And those type of things from the Christian story were so alien to the rest of the world I lived in, so contrary, that the little artist in me was always trying to make sense of it. So I had all these intrusive thoughts even before I would have considered myself a Christian. I never considered myself an atheist. I didn't ever come to a point where it made sense that this didn't all come from somewhere or someone. And what happened to me is I would just be walking down the street, I'd be going home to practice guitar or something like that. And I have these weird, intrusive thoughts, probably an angel or something hey, you should do more Christian music. I was like, what? And then I would sit down and try to write a song. And I really saw part of the identity of music, in rock and roll culture. I was into some hard rock at the time. That really seemed like a good way to meet girls, and get girls to like you. So that was kind of one of my motivations on why I'd wanted to be more popular, outside of the fact that I wanted to create music. And I just remember I'd sit down to write a song, and I was trying to write a standard heavy metal song or a hard rock song or even a pop rock song, and which was generally about dating and girls and love and I couldn't do it. I just kept writing about God and stuff, and I couldn't figure out why that was just resonating in my head. And quite honestly, I didn't even know what to write about God. Like, that's how little I knew. Like, I just didn't know. Except there was something higher than everything else, and there was something infinite, and there was something that actually cared about me. They created me, and this life wasn't arbitrary. Those themes kept coming out in the music, and so I didn't know what to make of it at first. So, in retrospect, you can see, like, behold, I stand at the door and knock. There's definitely, I'm hearing little raps on the door, or I'm like a baby who's hearing a voice outside of the womb, doesn't know what it is or what the words are yet. But I was definitely getting these impressions that, I guess the word someone might use was you're being called to it or drawn to it. So I definitely was. My cat agrees. It's talking, which is good.
Cats often do not agree, so that's a good sign.
Yeah, that's a great sign when you get agreement from my cat. It's a hard-fought agreement and consensus.
I like this cat already. That's a good place to even start, because I definitely wanted to bring up, like, the concept and idea of inspiration and being inspired in spirit, and then kind of like getting as musicians, when we write, so oftentimes we don't know where they come from, these songs, right? And also when you're in a jam practice, I'm sure you've experienced this yourself. It's kind of like watching schools of fish move, or birds kind of all working together in like a certain pattern. And when you're jamming with other artists, there's that unexplainable connection where all of a sudden you like have this idea to improvise something, and the band moves with you. There's like some sort of something's connecting it, and for me, it always felt like that, looking at it as in spirit, for the inspiration, that connection, that communication. When was the first time you felt that? Because you kind of described it there, sort of like the rapping on the door and that the little whispers in your head. When did you first start experiencing that when it came to music and songwriting, and how do you communicate with that?
Yeah. So these are great questions. I actually had to take notes because you had like 3 different streams going there for me. So I think from the time I was very young, I had a creative impulse. So when you're a little kid, you don't know how you kind of assume that other people are like you, or if you discover something different about yourself, you assume that maybe you're a freak or something like that. I don't know how you processed it, but when I was very young, I was always creating stories and things like that. So I remember one of the first examples of that I had was my parents had gone to see the movie Jaws 2. I think it was. And like, I was too young to see Jaws 1, and I was probably too young to see Jaws 2, but I really wanted to see Jaws 2. And my parents, I was obsessed with great white sharks and dinosaurs and things like that, like a 4-year-old. And so my mom tells me the story. She tells me what she can tell me without the crazy, gruesome details. And I wanted to see the movie so bad that I went and drew it, like everything she told me. So I made like my own little comic book as a little kid, and I had panels, and I was just starting to learn to write. And I would draw the movies that I wasn't allowed to see into little books. And then I show them to her. I'm like, hey, am I getting this right? Is this like it happened? So there was a definite pull into like the imaginative. I drew all the time, but I would even play to draw. Like, I'd draw a battleship, and then the planes around it, they'd be fighting each other. And yes, this is all related to creativity in the sense that my first impulse to make art, I think, was like to play with it, like to create a world for myself to go play in. And then simultaneously on top of that, it was I started making things because I wanted to see them. Like, quite literally wanted to see or hear them. I wanted them to exist so I could experience it. So that happened when I went over to music, as I was playing music, and I would hear, I'd hear other people playing. Like, I was starting to play guitar when I was around 12, and I didn't have many guitar players around me besides my guitar teacher, who didn't play much in front of me, just showed me stuff. And apparently he was an incredible player. But I would go home and listen to Eddie Van Halen, Yngwie Malmsteen, these like shredders from like the 80s. And I didn't know that those parts were hard, so I would learn them. Okay. And I didn't know any better. The example I use of that is like, cartoon physics, when the Roadrunner goes over the edge and he doesn't realize he's over the edge, and he just runs back, and he should have fallen to his death. It was like I didn't understand gravity, so it didn't apply. Yep. So I think I picked up guitar pretty quickly, but then you get into that impulse where you're like, oh, well, this thing they made is pretty cool. Could I do that myself? I think I went and saw Van Halen live when I was 13, and as soon as I saw that, I was like, I want to do this. This is like, they're like wizards. They're like casting spells and making a whole audience move. And I was really having a wonderful experience at it. And just the combination of being astonished by the talent and then being moved by, parts of the music where the whole crowd was bopping and flowing at the same time, like your flock of birds, like your school of fish. That it was like some kind of, I guess I wouldn't have said it that way now, but it is an attempt to bring the heavens to the earth, and that this sense that this pattern, these predictable patterns that happen all the time in the skies, to pattern nature in that way, like in a civilizational way, where we're all together doing the same thing at the same time, enjoying the same thing. Once I saw that, I was like, oh yeah, that's what I want to do. And well, if you're going to do that, you have to write songs. And then when it came to writing songs, it was back to the same impulse. It's like, well, what song do I want to hear? What kind of song do I want to hear? Right. And maybe there's a song I want to hear that doesn't exist yet. Maybe there's a style that doesn't exist yet. So you start pushing towards and drilling towards those things. But like you said, back to the animal analogy, I think I quote Dave Lynch on this sometimes, because Dave Lynch, who did Twin Peaks and Mulholland Drive, and he was very clear in saying, like, you don't come up with an idea, you catch an idea, like you catch a fish. So a chef doesn't say, hey, I created a fish. Or I made a fish. He said, no, I caught a fish, and then they prepared the fish for you. So that was one of the things I realized over time, that, like, who knows where these ideas were coming from? Probably a lot of them were external to you, and who was introducing them to you. So in my sense, like, the idea that I really got the sense that I was being introduced, like I had some kind of angelic unseen activity around me that was introducing me to things I didn't understand yet through music. And that's kind of how I got kicked off. So it was a very mystical thing for me. Like, it was coming from a place I couldn't figure out where. And that was a really wonderful experience, because you get the sense that there might be a voice on the other side of that womb trying to talk to you.
I love that answer. That was great. I can relate very much as a songwriter myself. Also someone that like to make stories in my head. So that will take me to my next question. Power of stories. So looking at your catalog, it's incredible, because you love to play with different mediums. You songwrite, you compose, you write stories, you're an author. All of these things are put together. Of course, a filmmaker. I don't know if I mentioned that. I was rambling.
You did in your intro. You're going to go back and do.
Oh yes, exactly. so all of this stuff, I'm watching what you're putting out there, and I even like how you use Kate as an instrument. Obviously, you have human voice as an instrument, and I can see how you write her parts, or it seems so to me, that you write as if it's a guitar, as if it's a drum, and then you kind of thread this entire story through like a sonic tapestry, and it really. It shows how much reverence you have for the crafting of stories. Obviously, you just mentioned that as a child you would do that, and imposing and threading through symbolism through that, using this inspiration that you just described. Now, my question would be, when you sit down to compose and to write and to put these things together, do you think to yourself, I want to present this as a story? Does it present itself as a story? How do stories fit into this?
So these are really fantastic questions. There's 1,000 ways I could answer it, because I think the ideas come to you for a certain reason. Meaning that you, like, in your mind, like, you open a possibility when you ask a question. So one of the things might be, like, you're going through life and you have a question in your head. It might be a really important question. It might be something as hard to answer as, what is the meaning of life? It might be a question of, what should I get for lunch today? It might be a question of, am I a loving enough person, right? Am I everything I ought to be? You might ask questions like this, and these things, ring around in your head. And people take questions into the world, and they look for answers, whether they mean to or not. You kind of hold some of these things in the back of your head. For example, we'll just take an insecure person. An insecure person is constantly going around, and they're going to have to fight the desire to try to prepare themselves to be something that they're farming attention and love from other people in a fake way. We can all do this, where we, like, basically cooking ourselves and serving ourselves to people to see if they like us. And so those are basically, that's a question about your internal value, and you're going out to try to find answers in the world. Well, this is where, kind of, if people ever paid attention to themselves, this is where creativity comes from, is that you have a problem and you're leaving question marks open. So creative people have way more question marks, and they've collected the world through those question marks. So maybe they're more curious. They also might have a better memory in the sense that they can, when it comes time to write a song, and it's like you have to think of the 7 different ways you can say the word think. Like, what am I thinking about right now? It's like, ponder, fathom. You start to come up with all these, different pontificate. You start to come up with these different words, and the better memory you had and the better experience you had in the world, you're going to have more to draw from. Okay, but getting back around, there are problems. So I have problems that are very similar to my audience. We have the same problems. There's just general problems that if I mention them to you, it will, in a poetic sense, it'll automatically open up a set of ideas and possibilities. So if I say to you like this, like, listen, everyone in your audience, the waves, those crashing waves are coming for their sandcastles. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it's just one sentence, right? But it's like, we understand what that means. Like in work, you're going to have to maintain your house, in your life, you're going to have to maintain everything. Everything's going to fall apart if you don't take care of it. There are very few things that take care of themselves like that you've built. So everything you built is dying. There's another thing. I just posted this on Twitter yesterday. Because I was just thinking about people, and I was thinking about audience, and I was thinking about encouraging people and how discouraging people can be sometimes. And I was like, man, there's not a person in the world who's loved too much, right? So you know that about your audience. There's not a single person, even yourself included, that's loved too much. No one has ever loved enough. And I don't mean love in like a modern moral therapeutic kind of like I'm trying to make you feel good kind of way. I'm talking about someone who actually cares and fights for you and fights for the good for you. Mm-hmm. So when you get into those kind of things and you kind of look back, you realize, if you wrestle with these problems yourself, you're going to find that there's 2 things you need to deal with. It's the comedy of it and the tragedy of it. And I don't mean comedy in a funny sense. I mean comedy in a blessed, glad sense, like the word would be meant in Greek theater. Like if a story was a comedy, it meant it ended well for the main character. If it was a tragedy, it ended poorly for the main character. So when you think about these problems in life, let's just say the problem of or Billie Eilish song, What Was I Made For? I love that title because you can see there's fingerprints on you, right? Like you were made by someone. Who made you and what was their intention? I think that's a wonderful question for a song. So you can think about all of these different categories of thought, and then you can solve those problems. So there's a couple of ways as you take those questions into the world and you pay attention to stories. There's really not that many different stories. There's different details, but I think there's like 9 types of stories you can tell total. So you go out in the world and you look at these stories, you start collecting these stories, and you're like, oh, okay, so let's imagine I'm trying to figure out what I was made for. You might go and observe someone who runs the rat race, wins the rat race, and ends up losing in the end because they never, what does it profit a man if he gains the world and loses his soul? Yep. So there's all kinds of dark, negative versions I can tell of people where we help them blow up the bad paths that the world is selling to them. Mm-hmm. So that's one way to generate an idea when you're thinking about it. The other idea is like, well, where's their hope? How can you take things that people thought were tragic for them and how can they be flipped into a victory? Like one of the things Jonathan Peugeot talks about all the time is like the relationship between death and glory. Yep. And that's something we understand in stories. Like, in other words, the closer that main character has to come to death and face death, the more glorious the victory is in the end. Yep. But we don't like that when it happens to us. So we need stories and we need songs to remind us of those things. So I know that was a little bit of a long rant because I kind of needed to start where the ideas come from in the first place. So if you drink in life deeply, if you don't just stay on a surface level of distraction and bounce around from different technologies and different relationships, and you actually start to ask the questions you're afraid to ask, you look out into the world for stories that give an answer, either blow up a bad path or shine light on a good path. You start paying attention to those things, you're going to have plenty of ideas on where to draw from. And so that's where the stories come from. For me, it's like a very specific problem or a pattern I see in the world. And the story, as I dwell on those problems, I don't actually answer the problem. I just get a story instead. So some days I'll just wake up with a story. I'll wake up with a song, things like that. And then if I go and tell that story to my wife and other people and they're engaged and I can see their eyes light up, I'm like, okay, this is definitely one I'm going to put in the stable of ideas that I'm going to begin to develop.
That's great. And it really shows in a lot of the stuff that you put out there. Because someone asked me to describe dirtpoorrobins, and I was like, it was someone recently, a friend of mine was checking out the show. He heard one of your songs, and he's asking me, well, who's this band? What's going on here? I'm not really sure how to place them. I'm like, yeah, that's that's beautiful music. Often you can't do that, right? Like it should always kind of change and evolve, right? And my description was like cabaret, steampunk, vaudeville, meets Pink Floyd, and through a splash of Tim Burton through the eyes of
Yeah, you're doing it. You're doing it. I'm going to put that all in my bio. Well done.
And then the guy's like, through the eyes of St. Paisios, what do you mean? And I'm like, well, oftentimes when you're a songwriter, sometimes you'll write something and you don't realize, you don't even understand the song that you wrote or what it is. I mean, this is the case for myself. And like sometimes I'll see I've worked something out in my life through the story or whatever, or sometimes I'll predict something and it turns out that you had a prediction.
Yeah.
So how did that happen? How did that come to pass? How did you feel as you were writing it? Was there a premonition here? And then my second part to the question would be, while the events of 2020 were occurring, what were your first thoughts when you went, oh my God, this is what I was writing about?
Yeah. Well, that's happened before that on that record for me. So I think this is something that people call it prescience, I guess is the word for it. And I wouldn't like to say anything like prophecy, except for not prophecy in the sense where I'm receiving secret information, but there is a general sense in which prophecy functions in the sense that we do it for each other all the time. It's like, hey, if you keep driving like that without a helmet on your motorcycle, it's not going to go well. It's not going to end well for you. Like, you can say things like that to people, and maybe one day they get in an accident. Maybe one day they listen to you and they decide not to do it and they avoid something that could have been tragic. There is a prophetic sense just in the general, like, hey, we look around the world, we see these patterns, we know where these patterns lead, and it takes some time and wisdom sometimes to figure out where those patterns lead, like in the sense that we were using asbestos for decades before people were like, oh, this is killing us. This is terrible. And people were smoking cigarettes before they realized it was a problem for a long time. So it takes us a long time to kind of do the proper cause and effect work, but once you've done it, you can extend it and you can apply it out. So, sorry, 1 second. I need a drink.
Yeah, take your time.
Taking my time. So about predicting the future. So there are these patterns that are everywhere. There's, if you ever looked, and I'll try to do this quickly because it's called typology or symbolism, but the Bible has the Bible has a pattern of a entire life of a human shaped in it, and in the sense that the Bible, the humans in it start out naked, unashamed. They eventually become aware they're naked. There's this wiping of the memory of the world and this flood where you're kind of starting over. This happens to everybody when they're around 3. Eventually you go to school and you're trained up for life under the law. You graduate with that law under your heart and you don't need that chaperone. That chaperone for you anymore, like Paul says. And then eventually, your body starts to fall apart. Your work life ends. You start to, lose your mind. Like, this is like kind of what happens in Revelation, in the sense the errors of the world start stacking up. We have this totalitarian beast and this pleasure-seeking, money-seeking harlot. And we see these weaponized masculinity, weaponized femininity in their ultimate forms in the end. And this is kind of what happens to us. We die in the end of the day. But not just that the Bible's shaped like our life, where it has a, infancy, all the way from like a womb where we're getting food for free in the Garden of Eden all the way till the end, that your day functions like that. You wake up the same way in the day. You kind of come to your senses. You put your clothes on, you get ready for work, you go out and work, you come home and you retire. You eventually start to lose your wits. While you're doing more recreational things, perhaps, and then you fall asleep, and then you have a dream. You have like an afterday, an afterlife. So this pattern is everywhere. So if you see that pattern, you can look at civilization, and just be like, oh, like right now, we're like in the West, maybe there's some new life, maybe there's not. Maybe we're just a doddering old, civilization. Maybe we've come to our end, and maybe we're seeing the same things occur that'll happen at the end of your life to the country. So when you're looking at things like this and you look at different patterns, let's just say the pattern of someone who's always playing it safe, what happens to them is eventually it's like, oh my gosh, well now they're safe from ever having an adventure or an experience or, something worth talking about over a beer with a friend, perhaps, or a story worth telling from a microphone. They avoid all those things. And what do you get in the end? You get, you get something you never really wanted in the end. All the time you're avoiding danger, you end up building a pretty cage for yourself, and you don't actually have a life in the world. So all of these things are patterns we recognize. And so when 2018, 2019 rolls around, I'm writing this story called Dead Horse, and It's based on a trouble I'm seeing in the world and in my own life. There's a desire to shrink back into the technology and the comforts of your home. There's you've got Netflix, so you're not going to go to the movies as much. You've got all these other ways to interact, so you're not going to get out there with people. And then people are starting to stream church services and stuff online. And people are staying home and watching church. And it's like, okay, well, where's that going to lead? This isn't good, right? We were made to be with each other. And the fact that the primary way we see God as Christians is we see God through other people. Like if we won't see God among us unless he acts through us. So there's, you start to anticipate that problem. And the story comes to me, and the story has to do with these people. It's like, oh, what would make people really scared and want to stay home? Like even more like, well, how about a disease? How about a pandemic? So you start to dream up this story. And then 2 years later, it turns out that everybody's seeing, there's other people in a negative sense seeing the same thing you're seeing. You're seeing it as a danger. They're seeing it as an opportunity to make money or to gain control. So that's how those kind of stories come about. But I mean, Queen of the Night had a similar function, and Firebird has had those kind of moments. People post about them. They relate them to things they see on the news. But this is something we all do. But most people don't bother to put their concerns of the future into the form of a story. So they don't know they're doing this. They don't know they have a way they're projecting the pattern into the future. But that's kind of... that's why our stories are kind of apocalyptic. And so when I say apocalyptic, I mean that in the very technical literary sense, not just about the end of the world, but apocalyptic meaning that it's an unveiling. Yes. So it's overlay of the unseen world, the metaphysical space on the real space, and an exaggeration of those things so that you can see them and then hopefully apply them back to your life and have the world redescribed to you. So one of the things people have been talking about disenchantment. I've been using the phrase, undescribed. Like the world in the modern world has been undescribed to us in the sense that you don't go out and look at trees and the sun and clouds and the way people used to, the way they used to look at this world and be like, oh, these things were made by God and they were shaped a certain way to teach us. They're descriptive. There's logic within them. There is a pattern within them. And that pattern is there to help us see the unseen world, the pattern that's in everything. So when people used to look at the world that way, it was a very different experience than going out and just seeing a bunch of mechanical causalities. There's a bunch of science at play and a bunch of cells. And like, sure, those things are there. And it's just the wrong level of it's the wrong level of analysis to understand the symbolism and the reason for things. So we're basically, part of what we're trying to do as artists is redescribe the world in a sense where it comes back to life for people, like where they can see it's spirited. They can see there's something mystical happening. They can see that there's a world beyond our own. And it's not just this flat horizontal existence of, atoms and chemicals and laws of physics. That in fact, those things in themselves, like even the laws of physics, if you're a Christian, you go back far enough, you're like, well, how are the laws of nature upheld? Oh, the angels. It's like, well, why is that a bad description? People are like, well, no, they're just these blunt forces of the universe. It's like, well, have you ever seen a blunt force act on anything without an agent?
That's right.
No, you haven't. So for me, it just seems obvious, but we're trying to help people recapture what almost everyone has believed throughout time. And we've built computers and other things like that. And we're starting to lose sight of the proper description of the world.
I love that you threw in apocalypse with the actual definition from Greek, apokalypto, to unveil, and it does fit with what you just described and how you described it. Like, and that is kind of the job of an artist. At least that I think we both agree on this. The artist's job, no matter what the art is, even if it's comedy or an author or whatever, is to do that, to unveil what's on the other side. Because on some level, because we see the world in a creative manner, the way that our brains wired, I guess, we can kind of tap into that. Not that everybody, not that the average person can't. It's just that we spend a lot of time in that space. Anyone can do it, right? So it is kind of a pulling back the veil and saying, hey, look over here. I'm not really sure what it means, but look at this thing over here. So I like that you put it that way. I didn't expect you to take it in that direction, and I think it's it's actually a really good description of what you guys do personally, like from like listening to your music and stuff. I do want to get to a few things that are connected to that, but before
let's do it.
And we will 100%. But before we do, I'd like to know, because orthodoxy, we're both orthodox. I'm Cradle. You're a convert. It gives you a different compass, I suppose you could say. Like, it gives you a different North Star when you incorporate Christianity into everything you've just said. So before we get to those things that I want to get to, how did you find orthodoxy? And what was that process like? And for yourself and your family, because obviously that has a lot to do with your music.
Well, orthodoxy, I guess, yeah, obviously it's there from the time I'm born. I'm just not aware of it at all. So this is obviously you can't act on something you're not aware of. So when part of how a lot of people come into faith is like they're coming in the middle of the movie. And you're trying to ask people to explain it to you, but they also came in like a minute before you, so they don't really know what's going on. They just know what is in front of them. They don't, but like in Christianity, it's like they don't really understand where they got the biblical canon from and why it's reliable, or where they got the doctrine of the Trinity from. Like all the circles I was in, it was like nobody knew where anything came from. And I wasn't at all aware of the Orthodox Church, although over time, I started to think more and more Orthodox. And I think that was a blend of this artistic impulse I was telling you about to like what some people call it re-enchantment. And I call it the disenchanting of the world is the undescribing of the world. It was like everybody started to name the animals wrong. Everybody started to name all the things. We lost our ability to mediate between the heavens and the earth. So I got really excited about biblical typology and symbolism, and we're writing about those things long before we're Orthodox. And I think one of the songs where I decided that was like a direction we were going to go in 2010, we released a song called Leviathan. And it's a typological look in comparison to modern problems of chaos that are too big for us to deal with compared back to the Leviathan of the Bible. And I had a weird notion too that when I saw that, even these a dragon of chaos, or the land behemoth, like even these things serve God in a way, whether they're devastating to us if we encounter something like that. Like, for example, even just take an idea of like Leviathan, meaning that it's a tidal wave. You live on the coastline, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, tidal wave comes in and destroys you. There was nothing you could do about it. You had no advanced warning. These things happen, but those things even are declaration of God. Like even tragedy is a declaration of God. These powerful events that happen in the world are declaration of God, because these things are easy for him to move or manipulate. Like Leviathan, who no man could tame in Scripture. This is like he's basically God's pet. He doesn't have to. God's not afraid of Leviathan, or he's like not even worried about getting his hand bit by Leviathan. So I started to deal with those ideas, and I don't know how I got a Leviathan sidetrack. I think I just like the idea. So, any kind of, and Godzilla is a great story too. And so I kind of take that idea that people delve too far. They went out, they unleashed something, they awoke something that comes back and is the detriment of their civilization. So I started thinking about that way, and I started looking at the Scripture that way. I was like, this is our thing. Like we're going to do biblical symbolism, which wasn't really a category in art at the time. But eventually throughout that decade after 2010, I started to become more and more aware of Orthodox thinkers, and Jonathan Peugeot came on my radar around the end of 2016, early 2017, maybe. And that's when I started hearing about the Orthodox Church. And I always assumed it was just Catholic, that it was basically, they just did the sign of the cross the opposite ways in Catholic Church and Orthodox Church, and that there were some variations in the artwork, but it was the same belief system. And I was always adverse to Catholics as a Protestant because of purgatory, papal infallibility was like, I don't even know if I've been like, you don't think the Pope can be wrong? I don't know about that. And so that was kind of my thing at the time, like not to be ingenuous to my Catholic friends. I have a lot of great Catholic friends, but I'm talking about my own perspective at the time. So there were certain things in that just seemed to be contrary to what we were handed over from Christ and the apostles in that church. So I kind of dismissed the Orthodox Church with them. I was like, oh, this is one of those weird man-made things. And this isn't what the early church really looked like. And but I actually got introduced beauty first approach to the Orthodox Church. So before anything was argued into me, I saw that there was like, oh my gosh, there's this language here, right? So if you go back and you look at any ancient civilization where they've dug it up and we don't know those people anymore, as soon as they reached a certain point in civilization where they could make stable architecture and maintain things, the next step they did across the world, cross-culturally, doesn't matter where you go, they started building their stuff as an answer to what was happening in the heavens. Like they would start lining pyramids up with the solstices, or the circumference of the earth, and the Aztecs were doing, and the Mayans were doing the same thing. And it's like all around the world, it's like everybody was building these monolithic stone structures that were designed to declare astronomical events. And that's the missing religious impulse in the world, is that when the stars become just like, Eustace says in C.S. Lewis's Voyage of the Dawn Treader, he's like, oh, in our world, stars are just this ball of incandescent gas that burns, like, in they're not like, because in this world he was in Narnia, the star also was a person, like had a persona. And, the star says to him when he says that, he's like, well, even in your world, that's not just what stars are. Mm-hmm. And so those things, reading those things as a kid and thinking about them, I was like, oh, like that's it. Like it is the impulse. It is something native to us that we're supposed to look up and see the pattern and see the regularity and see that there's a story and a language there. And we're supposed to bring that language to earth. So in Christianity, that was really made the most plain, where you can see every culture is reaching for these things. Every civilization is kind of trying to find a way to build and to bring the heavens here. Is that, in the middle of the Lord's Prayer, it says, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Yes. And this is something we all experience in the sense that you have a heavens and the earth. You have a immaterial aspect to you, like the stars and the heavens and the sun, and you have an eye that can look into the world during the daylight, and you have a spirit and you have a body, which is like your earth. And in fact, that this is part of the big story, is that God is making a bride for himself in Christ and the church. And so there's a heavens and the earth in that relationship, and there's an actual heavens and the earth outside in our world. And Christianity it's like the long-awaited Emmanuel. God is with us, and God is with us because the heavens have come to earth. Like we can start to experience that now. So the problem is that there was in none of our Protestant art, like every once in a while we tap into that a little bit, but most of the time it was kind of cheesy. It was kind of like people were really working hard to like get something evangelical into a story. Like the point of stories and music was to save someone. Mm-hmm. And I found that to be kind of unsatisfying as an artist, because I find when I would try to make art with an intention to do a specific thing to someone or plant a specific idea in their head, it was always crappy. It was my worst art, as opposed to the stuff that just came to me. And it came from a genuine place. And very often my art was a criticism of myself and my own things I was doing wrong. It was something very different that was going on that made it resonate deeply with me. So circling back around for orthodoxy, it was when I started to encounter the artwork, their understanding of it, the architecture, the music. And then once I saw the beauty, I was like, well, how do they get this so well? Like how has this been maintained for so many centuries? How is this thing I've been looking for in my own life? It was like I used this line in a song. It was like suddenly I met something I was trying to remember my whole life in the church.
I like that.
And so like I was trying to remember this thing, like where is it? Where's Eden? Where am I lost? And then I have this experience in the church, and it's so beautiful. And then what happens is like God back engineers probably to me the idea of asceticism, which is, well, if you want beauty and you don't want your life to fall to just be given over to the pleasures and the hedonism of the world, then you're going to need asceticism too. You're going to need these two sides of it. And by asceticism, I know that word slips by some people because they think of the word aesthetics, but I'm talking about aesthetics and asceticism really at the same time, which is there's the beauty in the aesthetics, and those aesthetics that are bringing down the pattern of the heavens to the earth and the church architecture and the artwork. But there's also the asceticism, which is like, okay, well, I need to have dominion over my passions and my body. So I need to mortify my flesh, which means I safely encounter little bits of death and fasting and praying when I don't want to, and all of these disciplines. Sometimes you even just need to go to church and be bored and stand there. It's so good for you because now your body, which doesn't know the big story, can fall in line and under the authority of your mind, which actually understands the bigger story and where it needs to go. Sure, your body's hungry right now. Sure, your body wants rest. It wants to do a thing, but there's a bigger, more important thing to do, and we have to have the dominion over ourselves to do that. So suddenly when I saw that, I saw how it had solved the problem that had kind of crept up in the Catholic Church, where there's these incredibly beautiful churches that are, becoming more and more beautiful, like in an artistic sense, like the Sistine Chapel, like for example, is one that people are well familiar with. That's just gorgeous, but it's freaking weird. It's like really weird for a Christian church to suddenly have like a naked Greek version of God the Father and naked little babies as the angel, like as they're described nowhere. Like none of these descriptions appear anywhere in Scripture or even like in a vision of a saint or anything like that. And then suddenly they're painting like things like that, and the statuary is becoming very sensual. And at the same time, they're kind of departing from the ascetic life, and they're starting to sell indulgences for, for your sins. So you can basically pay off your sins by giving money to the church. Mm-hmm. And this was a really bad pattern that I guess everybody's tried to move away from, that was going on at that time. But you can see that didn't happen in the Orthodox Church because, who knows all the different factors, but I think spiritually it doesn't happen because they don't abandon asceticism, that they're able to have the beauty without it tilting the scales towards pleasure seeking, because we encounter that beauty in a disciplined fashion in the services and participation in the church and participation in the liturgical life of the church, where we follow the calendar, we live out the Bible story, we live out the story of the saints, we live out the story of Christ in our life through every calendar year. So we have an experience with that. We're not just learning the scripture as a bunch of propositions we need to remember and somehow to apply. It's like, no, the very practice itself is the application of scripture. So as an artist, that was like life-saving for me, because I was getting lost in my mind just piling knowledge on top of impurity. So when I came across the Orthodox Church, like my first service there, it was like I had come home. I just started crying, and I tried not to cry because like I was kind of like well known in the town I was in, and I recognized a lot of people that would know me. I'm like just being a fool at church, but then I just stopped caring. I was like, no, this is it. It is what it's going to be. And I was so moved that I went home and told my wife about it, and she's on board with everything all the time. She's like always up for an adventure. That's awesome. And the same with the kids. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people have that experience when they try to take their family somewhere new, whether it's a new town, a new church, or whatever. They have all this kind of resistance. I mean, that was really minimal in our household. I think our kids thought they were going to Hogwarts suddenly when they became Orthodox.
With the wizards.
Yeah, compared to like literally, and compared to like the Calvinist circles we were in, which were about as dry as it could be when it came to beauty. It was all four walls and a gospel. Very nice people we were involved in and friends with. But that whole, almost like the true fairy tale structure of Christianity suddenly all came back in at once. And like the kid in me and my wife and my children, like it was really a restoration of that come to me like a child. It was like I felt that wonder really open back up. It was no longer me as an artist trying to manufacture my own life so I could write about it. I was actually having a profound experience with the mysteries of God in the church. So that's my I don't know if I ever told that story that way, but that's the way I told it today.
I'm very appreciative that you told it that way, because I've watched a bunch of your interviews, and that was very poetic. You tied in a lot of the things that we've already pre-mentioned in that story. Even like you have like really good soundbite, philosophical sound bites, I'll call them.
Thank you.
You said little bits of death.
Yeah.
At one point, and I was like, I know exactly what you mean, and it's the beauty. Like when I came back to the faith and looked at it from a totally different point of view, I was kind of looking at it from a fresh point of view. I had to humble myself and be like, okay, even though you grew up here, you know nothing about the faith. All these converts know a lot more. Look at it through their eyes. I got a copy of Death to the World. My background, punk rock. So I'm looking at this magazine and going, this is not the Orthodox I grew up with, but it is. You know what I mean? Like, and my grandfather, who's a big reason why I came back, he's from Cyprus, and in Cyprus, the brand of orthodoxy is a little bit more raw. It's a little bit more raw. Let's put it that way. Mm-hmm. And it is about death. It is the contemplation of like, that's where you're going. Almost like you're thankful for troubled times, thankful for difficulties in your life. So I like that you said little bits of death, because it also shows in our day-to-day and how we function. Mm-hmm. And also your poetic way of explaining all this brings us right back to where I wanted to kind of continue the conversation, and why I wanted you to bring up orthodoxy, because now it kind of puts everything in perspective.
Okay.
Your frame of mind. It also kind of shows how when you were younger, your earlier process was very orthodox. Even the way you described it, it was just like you didn't have a blueprint, and then all of a sudden you're given this like, oh, here it is. This is what I've always been looking for. So my question to you will be: art, beauty, is it objective? Because it does sound like we're on the same page on that. Can you just rant on that? Rant on, is beauty objective or is it subjective? Is it one or the other? How does it fit in with God?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this question comes up a lot, actually. I think most Christians want you to make a defense that is subjective, because they get a sense that even when there's a difference of opinion about a beauty, that there's there's got to be some ultimate answer. So where do all assessments of value begin and come from? They come from God, right? God creates and then he labels it good, right? So there's this notion that there's wisdom, which is like the invisible idea in your head. And then there's understanding, which is when you take that invisible idea, let's just say it's an imaginary blueprint of a house I want to build. And then I actually go and build the house, right? And then so I can look at the house and be like, okay, in my mind, I was testing this thing out. Like with wisdom, I was trying it out. Will this be the right materials? What should I use? How many rooms do I need? And you come up with this imaginary vision of it, and then you bring it into the real world. You might even have an intermediary stage where you have a blueprint. So you have wisdom, which is the idea for the thing and how it should function and be in the world, but it's invisible. And then the visible version of that, where it's incarnate, is the understanding of the thing. So I built the house and I can look at it and I can, like God, I can say, this is good, right? So like that's an assessment of value. And so all assessments of value inevitably are going to stack back up to the very first initiator and originate of all things. So when you're talking about whether something is beautiful or not, the being objective, well, if we're going to bring it all the way up to God, then of course it's like what God finds beautiful is what's truly beautiful, and what he thinks is ill-formed or ill-made is ill-made. What he thinks is evil. So our part of what we're going to be doing now with our lives is bringing ourselves in alignment, like being able to walk with God in the cool of the morning in the garden again, to strip ourselves of all of the noise and all of the distractions, so that we can actually get back into a relationship with God, and he can walk us around the garden and explain what things are for, what they're made for. So if someone says that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I get it too. Because there is this thing where part of what we're dependent on in life is the idea that you have a common experience in the world to me. Meaning that when you go outside and it's sunny and you're cold and it's warm outside, it's a pleasant thing to be met by the sun. That when you're thirsty and you drink a glass of water and you describe that to me, you're assuming that I'm having the same experience with that, and I'm assuming that you're having the same experience with that. That, yeah, we know what water's like. We know what pain is like. We know what joy is like. We know what it feels like to be angry. And then I assume that my feeling of angry, I know I'm going way out of my way to over-describe this, is the same as your feeling of angry, or at least I can try to read you and measure how it might be different. So there's this sense that part of what binds us together is a sense that we have a common experience in the natural world. But then all of a sudden something happens where you'll play a song in your station, right? And then people are like, oh my gosh, where is this? I didn't, like this, where's this artist been all my whole life? I love it. And some other guy's like, not my cup of tea. And so both people in the conversation there's something jarring and almost betraying about when that happens, when you're showing someone something you love and they don't.
Yes.
Now it's pointing to the fact that there is something different in our two experiences, and how much is different. And so if people pay really close attention to themselves and they're attending to themselves in that moment that happens when there's a difference of opinion, they're going to notice that actually this is a breaking in fellowship. And what does that mean? And so is that what the subjective is? Is the subjective is that we haven't been brought back into line to God? Is the subjective that we're actually something like different type of animals within the human community? Like some people are more like a bird. Some people are more like a horse. Some people are more like a lion. Some people are more like an eagle, right? And I think you're going to find that both things are true at the same time. So there's a misreading of what's happening on when there's the difference of opinion. So, for example, we have the four evangelists and we have the four perspectives of the gospel story. And, we have an eagle perspective. We have like John, and then we have the kingly lion, the bull, which is the priestly perspective, and the man, which is, the incarnate person of Christ, in these perspective in the four gospels. And they're all beautiful and they're all right. And they're all a little different. So you fall into the same problem with beauty, is that if you think it's objective in the way that everybody's going to feel the same about it, you miss the point of why God made so many people differently, right? If you also understand that beauty and life, these things are attached, that actually we find something beautiful when that imaginary idea of the house comes into being, and then we go into the house and we have a life in the house, and it's the right life in the house, right? So, for example, if I have the idea of, hey, we're going to open a restaurant together, right? And you and I talk about it. Then we build the restaurant. We look at it like this restaurant's great. And then we open the doors and in comes a soccer team and they've dropped a soccer ball and they start kicking it around the restaurant. We're going to be like, oh my gosh, like they don't know how to use this space. And that's how the Bible uses the word knowledge, in the sense that you have wisdom, which is the pattern of the idea. You have the understanding, which is the embodiment of that idea. And then you have knowledge, which is the proper use of that idea, which is the correct participation in it. So the thing is that because we're all going to have different attributes of God that are stronger in us. Like some people are going to be better at seeing, and I don't just mean with their eyes. I mean, like, their nous, their intellect. They're going to be able to grasp certain things more quickly than other people. There's going to be other people that can just go out and swing a hammer all day long and build something beautiful with it and actually keep the world together, while someone else sits on a rock and thinks. And the thing they might enjoy and want to do, and what their appetite is leading them towards, like a good appetite is leading them towards, is not the same as saying something is beautiful to one person that isn't to another. I think that beauty, again, at the end of the day, beauty is something that's way above us. It's something we can all experience that we can't fully describe ever. It's very hard to describe these kind of things. It's even hard to describe a genre of music to someone who's never heard it, because you have to compare it to other things they've heard. And to learn in the first place, you have to have a body and an experience in the world, and then you have to get names for these things, and you have to be able to share these names with people. So I think there is a bit of confusion between like objective and subjective descriptions of beauty. But I think real beauty is always going to come down to what's in God's head, and is that thing when it exists in the world, acting and doing what God would intend for it to do. And that's when it's beautiful to. That's why a sunrise and a sunset's beautiful. This is an ordained thing that's happening properly. It's confusing that we should find it so beautiful every day, that we should be able to go out and see an infinite number of sunsets. And for some reason, it's never fatiguing or boring to look at a sunset when you're out in nature. It's never boring to go to some natural wonder of the world. I mean, it can be over time if you spend too much time there, or a different interest takes over. But with that said, there's definitely a lot of hope in beauty. So I would say that people should use beauty to find hope, right? In the sense that when you see something that's really beautiful, whether it's a church, whether it's a mother taking care of a child, whether it's something that grew organically, whether it's something that someone crafted and sculpted with their own hands, we should find a lot of hope in that, because it's evidence that the heavens are coming to earth. It's evidence that the world is being made new. Despite all the political things we can focus on, all of those type of things, is that as an Orthodox Christian, we really have a beautiful experience in the world, because the church is getting larger and larger with every day, with every generation. It's not like I was lost in my other previous view where it's like, it's just me and God here. And where I was always focused on politics and thinking about that. When you see the church victorious, the church triumphant, the fact that there are no dead in Christ, you learn about this. You see in the book of Hebrews where they're venerating all of these people of faith, and they're not venerating them in the sense that they're dead. They're a cloud of witnesses. They're listening and they're hearing. They're with their ears and they're hearing, and they're seeing with their eyes. They're witnessing what you're doing, and they're participating in it in a very strange way. It's very encouraging when you think about the objective experience of beauty, in the sense that if you're a part of God's family is getting bigger, and everyone who's lost with their father as the devil, everyone who's been demonized, they can't do you any harm any longer. They're gone. Hitler's gone. Genghis Khan is gone, right? But Paul the Apostle, Peter, St. Basil the Great, St. John Chrysostom, St. Paisios, like they're here with you and they're part of your life. And the church in an unseen way is gaining momentum all the time. So that beauty, I think people should look to beauty with a great amount of hope for the promise that is to come, and to give them even more reason to struggle towards it. Yeah. Because you're going to need every reason you can to do what is right, because it's very seldomly going to be feel like the easy thing to do at the time. So this is what art does, man. It's supposed to, like, civilization is supposed to get to a point where it has the money, the finances to fund, create, and initiate beautiful things that will last in the future. And those are not just arbitrary beautiful things. Those are beautiful things that are designed to bring the unseen of the heavens incarnate into the earth. And that is Christian art. And that's the highest form of art as far as I'm concerned.
You blew me away with that answer, man. I'm going to have a hard time compiling a highlight reel here with this interview. That soundbite there, that little philosophical soundbite, people should experience beauty to find hope.
Mm-hmm.
That right there is that really touches me, like, because that's literally what I've been trying to kind of with my show, with the radio show. Sometimes I'll play some artists that maybe might be a little jarring to some people that have never heard them, like Captain Beefheart or
I was just listening to Captain Beefheart yesterday with my wife. That's so funny.
So like, I'm a massive Captain Beefheart fan and a big Tom Waits fan, right? And
huge Tom Waits fan, yeah.
And when you introduce someone that's never heard that before, they're like, "Oh, this is just noise." He's just like rah 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 and all that. I'm like, no, it's not noise. You know what I mean? And then as you become accustomed to it and you kind of climatize yourself to that world, you start to really see the beauty of the grittiness of it. Because, like, a tree has imperfections, and there's a lyric to one of my songs is like, "Nature's perfect imperfections," and the perfect imperfection that is created through nature, through God, is what brings the beauty when you don't look at it as one solid thing, but you look at it as, like, for example, like if you take a bunch of metal shrapnel and you put it on a paper and you put a magnet underneath, if you focus really close to it, it just looks like a bunch of dots on a piece of paper. But when you zoom out, you see the pattern of the magnetic field. And oftentimes music or art in general, when it's done from the intention of communicating something that's godlike. So I'm also trying to include non-Christians in that description, because Logos Spermatico finds itself in a lot of art. It's doing that where it's like zooming out and showing you the pattern, this beautiful shape that's created out of something that when you look at it really closely, just looks really random. Sorry, that was my little rant.
No, you're cooking. Keep going.
And honestly, to me, it sounds like a lot of your descriptions and the way you piece things together and the way you've described them, it is an apocalypto. It's an unveiling of the mechanics, if I could put it that way, because it's hard to put these things into words, right? Like we're talking about something that's abstract but metaphysical. Brings us back to the church, the mysteria. Like our church is very much based around the mysteries and praxis rather than like scholasticism and like breaking it down. So back to the magnetic design, the way you just described that, hope and beauty, and if we lived in a society where people had more of an emphasis on that, one art would influence the other artist, right? So if more people understood, like Captain Beefheart, let's say, and the beauty of that, you'd have more intellectual. I don't want to use the word intellectual, but like with your stuff, you have to engage with the art. Like it engages with you. You engage with it, and it requires a commitment of attention, of focus, and it gives you something in return through the stories that you write and all that stuff. So what I'm trying to get at is, I don't really know what I'm trying to get at, but one thing I'm trying to put out there is the pattern, the beauty, and the intelligence. Because your music, let me just put it this way, you have to have a certain interest in thought.
No. Okay. I'll jump in. So what you're talking about is something that's really important to me, though. Well, you said a number of things I kind of want to touch on, but I'll just stay with the one we just ended on. So the idea of that you have to think. So I hopefully there's like a level of beauty that someone could get right away before they understood a lyric or the theme of the song. Hopefully there's something in the quality of it where they're like, okay, this is of quality, this is catchy, whatever. They can tell something good's coming. But what I really want to do, and so I don't think enough people do it, is you need to reward people if they decide to dig. Like if they start digging, you gotta have things layered in there. And how hard do they want to dig? So I try to do that with everything we're doing, in the sense that, like, let's just take a name. You're gonna name a character in a film. Okay, you're gonna name a character in your story. If someone looks up the etymology of that name or the history of a certain person that shared that name, they might learn more about your character. Or that even just the sound of the name, like something that Charles Dickens did really well. Like all of his characters had a name that's kind of sounded like their character. Like even Ebenezer Scrooge, where the word Ebenezer is pointing to something more positive that could happen to him, but the name Ebenezer Scrooge, his whole personality is kind of in that, right? It's this blessed man who's, very stingy with his blessings. And so I try to do things like that with the character names. So that's just one example of how we could talk about this. But even another way, like in our film Queen of the Night, the main character's name is Oliver Graves. And just the sound of the name also has a level. It's like, and there's a newspaper headline that I kind of sneak in the background of the film that when he picks up a newspaper, it says, the city's future is Oliver Graves. And if you think about that and you didn't see the name Oliver Graves, you might have heard all of our graves, like all of our graves. And then like he's a Graves tower and the tower is a tomb and the tower is like the Tower of Babel. So what you want to do is you want to put things in there where people dig. Well, if they can keep digging deeper and they go into his parents' names and their names actually match their backstory. And then you look at the character like he's wearing white shoes. It's like, why is this guy wearing a black suit wearing white shoes? Like, well, he thinks he's above everyone. He's walking on clouds, right? So you bake in on every level because you have to decide every detail you bring into a song or a story, you have to put there. So make it a detail that participates deeper in the story than, oh, we just have to, this guy, we have to put glasses on him. We have to put a jacket on him. No, make those things have meaning in the story and tell you something about the character. So I think that's a factor in there. You talked about this like imperfect perfections, right? Like I love this idea too, because this is something I think people miss. So you're talking about Tom Waits and you're talking about like why that's beautiful. And so one of the things I try to, would be a thing specifically to encourage people who are making art. If people can't imitate it, if they can't make fun of it, if you haven't given them anything they can sink their teeth into. So the problem is that you can think about all the iconic pop stars over time. Is it you can go to Las Vegas and someone does an impersonation and you know who they are. It's like, well, how do you know they are? Well, if they were just like everyone else in every other way, or they were had safe, perfect categories, they would be unrecognizable from an abstraction of that category. Like, so the idea is you never sit down, like even if you were writing disco music back in the day, you're never trying to write the perfect disco song. You were trying to write a song that could be included in disco, but did something different than every other disco song had done before it. So this goes that way for people. So when you're listening to someone like Tom Waits, like for me, I have that impression at first. I'm like, why is Cookie Monster singing? It's like, why did someone give this beautiful song with these beautiful lyrics to Cookie Monster? And then you get into it and you're like, oh, it's broken and it's beautiful. And you start to realize something you touched on before about Death to the World is that these are the overlooked categories of beauty. People don't understand that, like, as a Christian, if you're going to be the salt of the earth, that means you have to have your head around death. Because salt comes from death, if you want to understand how it exists in the natural world, in the sense that pure water comes down from heaven, like Revelation. It has life, it has logos, it has nutrition, it has things that can sustain your body and your life and the world and all the things in the world. Well, as it comes down into the world, it starts to pick up all the imperfections of the world, all the dirt of the world. It eventually becomes polluted to the point you can no longer drink it. It's no longer potable. So that, in the Bible, they always use the abyss, these waters, like the undrinkable waters, as an example of hell, which is strange. Like in the story of Legion, it's like, what does it mean to, a bunch of demons come into the world and they go into the creatures that are driven by their appetites. And those creatures, they run themselves off into the abyss and die. Right? That's an image of being demonized in the world. That's an image of what happens to you, that you will cede over through giving over to your passions. You will cede over the territory of your heart and your life to the demonic, and you won't be free anymore. You're going to think you were doing this to be free, but you're actually going to be less than free, and this is going to lead you into the abyss. Well, the thing about being the salt of the earth is that it's all the dead things. It's the roots of the tree that feed off the dead. It's not just the part of the tree that feeds off the light and the air, right? In the dead, they find the secret waters. They find the living waters that are left and scattered throughout the world. Like you find a gem underwater, like you find a fish under the ocean. And it also pulls up all of the death and decay into the roots and makes that become part of the tree. So if you pay attention to that story, you're not telling the Christian story if you're talking about the reclamation of death to your own salvation. If you don't understand the relationship between your death and your glory, or any character, like even in any story, the closer a character comes to death, the more heroic their victory is. The more they were oppressed and the more they suffered on their way there, the more important it was that they won. And the same goes for life, in the sense that if we're just going to zoom out and talk about orthodoxy specifically, look at an icon of the Last Judgment. It's an icon of your own body. It has a left side, a right side. It has a digestive system. God takes you in at the end. He takes you in to the grave. Right. And that which comes into God, which is good to become part of his body, is drawn back up to life through his body. Right. The parts that are not good for the body, just like your own body, they go out, they're gone, they go to hell, if you want to look at it that way. So the contemplation of death is such an important thing, and it's been so lost. Memento Mori, you have to understand you're going to die, and you're going, if you don't come to terms with your own death, you're going to try to cover it up all kinds of ways. You're going to try to dye your hair. You're going to try to get hair transplants. You're going to get cosmetic surgery. You're going to get boob jobs. You're going to do all these things. You're going to start stacking up higher and higher ceilings to put the world farther and farther away from you. The inevitable things you're going to, like the rich man in the story of the rich man and Lazarus, you're eventually going to bury yourself into Hades under all these things. Because this was not how we solved the problem of death. We solved the problem of death by looking right at the serpent that's crucified, the cursed serpent, and we move towards that voluntarily, knowing that there's something better on the other side because Christ has already shown us that. So, and just in a nutshell, when we're talking about this imperfect perfection, the problem is death is bad. Death is bad, except that now that it's here, it's really bad for you to avoid it and to run from it. So it's something you have to eat as part of the deal. It's how you're going to preserve the world, is by showing them how to die well. And this is part of that beautiful imperfections. I think these imperfections aren't just imperfections. They're actually necessary to the story, to propel the story forward, in the sense that you won't remember a thing, you won't understand it, you won't relate to it unless it has a flaw that it overcomes. And that's part of what we're doing here. And the biggest flaw we have to overcome is that you were granted a temporary body, you were granted a temporal life, so that your fall could be temporary, right? If we were allowed, like in the Garden of Eden, people wonder why did they get kicked out? Why did they get kicked out here? You know, what does God mean? He takes them away from the tree of life. You know, he's protecting them from the tree of life, because if they eat that tree, they're going to be frozen, no longer temporal, stuck in their fall forever, like the demons. And so these things, I think they all relate back together, and there's like something really wonderful going on in music and stories that we don't understand, that like the story of a tree in the natural world, the story of your body and eating and digesting and struggling with things and getting sick. And then finally, like the weird mysteries in the world where we find that all of this is declaring God's goodness and his glory. Like there's that one story in the gospel where there's the friends lower the cripple through the ceiling. Right, there's a crippled guy and the house is full. The world is full. It's too full for this crippled person. There's all these able-bodied people inside, and suddenly the roof opens up and this light beams through, and it's like, oh, something's being lowered from the heavens while Jesus is talking. What could that be? It's going to be wonderful. Is it going to be an angel? Is it going to be God himself? What's it going to be? No, it's a crippled man on a pallet. We'll talk about the artistry of that. It's like, hey, this is beautiful. This is you. You're coming down, right? You're going to eventually one day be severed from your body, and you're going to want to get back up on your feet and walk again, right?
Yep.
And Christ shows you through his forgiveness, through his healing, he's going to restore your body. And so art is going to do that. Like we can't just sit there and talk about things we're comfortable with or give us immediate satisfaction. That the real beauty is also going to have to be mined through the whole bottom side of the tree. We're going to have to let our roots go deep into death. Let our roots reach all the way to the bottom of the world and contemplate those things, and use the power God gave us in a relationship with him and his church to overcome the fear of death, so we can go back out and act in the world for the good, regardless of what it means to us. So that's what you're doing as an artist. Like, I mean, that's what a Christian artist is supposed to do, I think. Yes. Whether you're doing explicit Christian music or not, I mean, we're all in the same boat, and it's going down. And the waves are coming for the sandcastle, right? So we've got to do something. And why not help? Why not be part of waking people up to that, so they can suffer with you well, and they can suffer with you with peace, and that they could give up this life and actually get it back, and then the next in return.
You blew me away, man. like honestly, that was I really feel that's you nailed it. It connected, and I'm pretty sure it's going to connect with the majority of people that watch this, whether they're artists or not. That's beautiful. We're at the hour mark or so. Please, if you have any final thoughts, whatever it is, anything we discussed, you want to rant for like another 20 minutes, I'm letting you just do what you got to do. Please get into that flow state. Just whatever you have to say, just gush it out, and then we'll tie it up at the end with promoting some of your stuff and all that. But please, if you got anything, just go.
No, I guess. Okay. I guess if I was going to say one more thing, it would be to round out the last point I made, if that's okay.
Please.
So you probably know Father Peter Hears is.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, his brother John Hears runs First Things.
Yep.
And First Things has this really beautiful tradition they've done. They've taken this idea of what's called a Georgian feast. It's called a supra. The supra, right? And so they bring that around the world as a way to help people reconnect in like better fellowship. Like part of what I like to think about is like when they talk about like your rewards in heaven, like you're gonna have these crowns. I think we do that. We go really wrong if we think of those as deeds we did. Mm-hmm. I think it goes really right if you think of those as people, like that people you helped, right? The people you loved, right? Okay. The people that God gave you work to do on their behalf and you did it. Mm-hmm. Those crowns are also going to be people you had the good sense to listen to that were right, like they were wise. And so there's something very personal about the truth, about fellowship, and that in fact, fellowship on earth here is like when it goes well, you can start to see what heaven's going to be like, what it's going to be like to really not have enmity between you and your brothers and sisters. The idea that you're not going to have those catastrophic moments when you disagree with them politically or artistically or something like that. So anyway, he holds these feasts, and these feasts are really wonderful, especially at a time where things have become so political, because I'm sitting around the table and I'm listening to just all different types of people. Now, people assume when you're like intellectually or artistically oriented that somehow you're bored with people who aren't. And I find that that's like exactly the opposite. Like I'm not sitting there thinking about, look at all these uncreative. Yep. I never thought that in my life, looking at a bunch of people, unless they started trying to give me song ideas and they were terrible. Then I'm kind of like, why is this uncreative person sitting here telling me what to play? But yeah, we all hate that. They're like, hey, God gave me a song. It's like, no, God gave you that song because he didn't want it. And the joke's on you. So anyway, no, but there's this, you're sitting around the table and you're listening to like story after story, people who almost lost their child or did lose a child, or people who just buried a parent that they love dearly, or someone who just lost a job, or someone who's had a tremendous victory you're celebrating with them. And you're listening to people toast, and they're picking up their wine and they're toasting, but it's not like a wedding toast or a typical wedding toast where it's just, hey, here's some cool little anecdote. And there are anecdotes and things like that, but it's really meant to be heartfelt, and the more vulnerable you can be, the better, without going over the top. So as you sit there in the as you sit there through these dinners, like you're just getting closer and closer to the people around you. And like, that's not just what's happening. It's like, you start to realize like it's a really dignified thing to be a human. It's like, wow, this is really a wonderful thing to be a human being. Especially like when you go, if I went home and I just started flipping through the news and YouTube, I would get a very different picture of what other people are like compared to the table I just sat around. Now I'm sitting at a table with people who voted all different kind of ways. I didn't vote. I know this guy voted differently than I would have. This person voted differently than I would have, even though I didn't. And I'm listening, and that's not coming up. It's not a factor. You're hearing a person who's had an experience in the world, and you relate to it, and you know what it's like, and you realize like, wow, this is like really, like life is hard, but life is beautiful. Yes. And it's wonderful to be a person. But then you put on the news and it's like, man, politics is all about pointing out how dumb other people are, how evil this person is, or how misguided and intentionally bad this is. And like it's boogeyman here, and, Jason Voorhees from Friday the 13th over here. And it just doesn't matter which group you're listening to. They spend most of their energy talking about how like demonized the other side is. And it's an important thing for people to recognize, because like you can't live in that world. Like you have to stop living in that world. I don't care what you believe or where you're from. Politics has its place in the world, but it's not going to redeem you. It's like your family and your friends and your church. This is the thing. This is how you're going to set the world straight better than sitting at home and getting mad over things you can't control. So, but I mean, this works in a very practical sense all the way down to the ground. Like when you have kids, like you might notice that you're going to hit a point where eventually your kids come home and they're talking bad about someone they were just with, right? Or they're gossiping, they're spreading a rumor. And it's like, guys, you don't get to do that for free. Yeah. Like you don't get to do that for free, meaning that if you think that someone made in God's image can be treated the way you're treating that person and spoken about them, then you're inevitably, you don't realize it, but you're bringing yourself down with them. Because you're made in God's image. And that means someone can talk to you that way. Someone can judge you that way. Someone can treat you that way. So one of the problems I think in the world right now, and how we're going to set the world straight, is that people are going to have to tune it out. Like they're going to have to get involved just enough
Yes.
and then spend their life with actual people they commune with and care about and love and listen to them, and they listen to you, and you share more than you're comfortable with sharing, and you don't trust them because they're trustworthy. You trust them because people can break your trust, and they will your whole life, and you're going to keep going. And God can heal that, and God can fix that. And in fact, that it might actually, that feeling of betrayal might actually expose a way that you're looking to people for something you should be looking to God for. Like there's all kinds of things like that. So like, I know this is like a real like dad moment, like kind of talking to people, but I think it relates so well to art because for some artists, it's like, it was always easy for me just to go really dark. It's like, oh, I can talk about something really dark and it's mysterious. It's automatically mysterious, and it had some depth because a lot of people don't want to tell those kind of stories. At the same time, there's something just as deep in what we would say is like the positive, wholesome, earnest, beautiful. And so that's the thing is like, like I said earlier, like no one is loved enough. So don't hold back the good from them. Don't, like, we do it all the time. If you listen to your brain, like there's some kind of nice thing you could say to someone sitting next to you that's true. Like I'm not talking about like a blanket compliment, like, hey, I like your clothes, but like something deep and true, or something you see God doing in their life. Don't hold that back from people. And, and please, like, just turn off the crap, because that is not, when we're talking about what is truly beautiful, that is the way that politics and the news and our culture names other people is not the way God names them. And it's certainly not the way God names you. So I think if you're going to become an artist in your own life, it's going to be turning the high standard inwardly, right, to work on yourself, and using the fact that there's so much work left to do in you as generosity for the world outside and towards them. So that would be my rant to kind of balance off some of what we talked about. Like, I like to talk about both sides of beauty, and really the beauty of love. Love exists in relationship with other people, despite how hard it is. You'll never have the life you wanted if you don't develop the skills to connect with people in the way God intended. You're going to fill your life with crap you never wanted. And so that's part of what we sing about. So if you want to listen to our music, you can hear many of these themes we've talked about today on the podcast.
Go ahead. Tell us anything that you got coming up, anything that you're working on, you want to plug. You got the new vinyl popped up recently. Go for it, please.
Yeah. So we got. Oh, hold on. I actually have one of these near me.
I was hoping you would.
Let's put it on stream.
Yes, sir. Please.
Let's see how it looks. Okay, I got to put my headphone back in my ear though, and I threw it on the ground randomly, like an impatient child. Now I found it. Okay, so back to the record.
Yes, sir.
Voila.
Yes, sir.
It's backwards, upside down. What's going on? There it is.
There you go. You got it.
You can kind of see it. Okay.
Firebird, we could see it.
Oh yeah, if I get the color looks a little different than it does in real life. It's kind of more. It looks bluer, but anyway, James Flames did the artwork. He is a wonderful artist. He's an Orthodox Christian in, I think, North Carolina or South Carolina. Okay. And he is really one of my favorite artists back out there. So it's really great to collaborate with him. We've got a bunch of stuff coming up. I kind of like, if there's Orthodox people in your chat, I just ask people to pray for us. There's, we're always running into this problem where we never were like, hey, we're a Christian artist, like meaning that label really belonged to like Protestant circles. And I never related to that category. It just felt like a lyric based category, as opposed to genres of music really aren't just about what you sing about. Because in Christian music and Christian artists, you could have a Christian blues artist, you could have a Christian rock artist. So it was like this weird like category of like this smaller subgenre based upon a certain like subject matter to your lyrics. So we never grabbed on that label. So the cool thing is, over the years, is like everybody from like all kinds of walks listens to our music. And a lot of people are on the left. So what's happened recently is, with the political situation, is that people on the left have gotten way worse than the people on the right. So like on the right, I'll get people that criticize us every once in a while. They're like, hey, how come you don't sing about Jesus or something like that? They have some kind of, maybe some kind of pedantic Christian goal for our music that really has nothing to do with our mission. But then on the other side, I get, so like liberals will be like, why do you talk to Jonathan Peugeot? Why do you talk to Jordan Peterson? Why do you, why are these people your friends? And they immediately like want to cut you off like you're hanging out with heretics. And I just don't get it at all. But the reality is that all of those doors on the left, like all the people that would have had us on, just because I've been on a couple of right wing things, they're done. They just don't want to talk to us anymore. So basically in 2025, we're saying yes to a bunch of stuff that's just going to double down on that. So Jordan Peterson's invited us back out with him. He has us singing at ARC. We're going to be doing some just basically just some Christian conferences where we come and play music at our band. It's the same songs everybody knows and loves at home who might be leftist, but just pray for people because we need, it's like one of those annoying things where it's like, well, I want to do the right thing regardless of money, but we also don't want to lose half our audience. At the same time, if like God opens doors, I need to go through them. And so hopefully he's opening these doors and we're walking through them. So that's something to think about. Something to think about all the artists you support. Like you play a bunch of Orthodox artists on here. It's like,
Yep.
Now, not in like a weird nepotism kind of way do you want to support those people, but if you, just because they're Orthodox, but if you like them, by all means, like go above and beyond because they're in a world it's a lot harder. We need alternative paths in this world, and those paths are not made by me; they're made by you and everyone else like you, like people like you playing stuff on the radio. And these alternative paths are made by people sharing like on social and telling their friends about it or finding the song they like they can share. So we need like wisdom about how to keep moving forward because I don't want to say no to anywhere we want to go or people we like to play with or people we like to sing with or, speaking engagements or podcasts. Like I go on, some people get really mad about podcasts I go on. They'll go back and watch like every episode and find the one spot where the guy said something negative about a trans person. And then they're like, then they try to blow up Reddit with it. And so I'm not letting those people like decide who I talk to and what I do. Bravo. At the same time, it would be really helpful if like everybody else, looks for artists like us or kind of in this in between space and does what they can to support them and make sure that I guess the overly zealous, religiously, politically affiliated people don't intimidate or shut down things that they love. You want to make sure that you're part of being helping that. So we've got a lot of shows coming up in 2025. We got a new record. Our new record's going to have, speaking of Tom Waits, it's going to have more of a Western vibe, like a little bit Tom Waitsy, like his Alice record. I love that record.
Oh, Alice, that's so good.
Yeah, it's such a great record. So but it's going to have a little of Johnny Cash, a little Tom Waits, a little Leonard Cohen, a little bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly score, but also Dirtpoorrobins on top of that. So it's a Western fairy tale, the next story. And that's coming out next year. And then finally,
we're album for me sounds like. That's what it sounds like.
My oldest daughter said the same thing. She's like, "Finally, you guys are gonna make something I like." So
that's not what I said. That's not what I said.
No, I'm just messing with you. So we got that going on, and then I'm also working on a movie called Christianities with Father Peter Heers and John Heers, and hopefully we're going to be doing the music for that. But right now we're just in the production and getting it financed and funded. So if you go to christianitiesthemovie.com, that's Christianities plural, the movie. You can see if there's anything you can do to support or just follow the channels and share, because that movie is going to be great. I'm really excited about what we're doing. We're going to Mount Athos in January to film, and that's my first time there, so I'm super excited about that.
Glory to God. That's awesome, man. Well, first of all, a lot of the thoughts what you were just went off on, that's what we do here, and I'll tell you a little bit more about it when we go off air, and that's what we're building towards. I play music I like. There are a few Orthodox musicians. I'm not a huge fan of their thing, but I play music I like, not just because it's Orthodox. It just so happens that we do have like a lot more artists than I realized when I got into the space. I was like, okay, because I feel the same way as you do when you described Protestant Christian, worship music. I used to work for Sony BMG for a subsidiary label, and we used to put out a lot of that, and it just didn't sit right with me. And that is not what you guys do, or Justin Marler or Luxury or a lot of these great Orthodox musicians. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
I also like the fact that you're going to be, if I'm not mistaken, I think I heard Ruslan say that you're doing some event.
Oh, yeah. Ruslan. Yeah. Yeah.
I like the fact that that you're going out there, you're being openly orthodox, if I could put it that way.
Yeah.
You're not hiding it, and I do appreciate the way you spoke on his podcast, yourself and Jonathan. You guys were very direct. You know, you're polite, but you also pushed back when need be, and I really appreciated that. You didn't take a I hope it's okay I say it this way. You didn't take a complete pacifist. How would I put it? You know what I mean. You were direct.
Yeah.
You were honest, you were raw.
So here's how we describe that. So basically, I think that there was an ecumenical move that happened really hard in the 20th century that caused a lot of Christian nihilism. So in other words, like part of a newer doctrine that exists in the West in Protestantism, and it seems like it's being adapted by Catholics a little bit, is the idea that of that, hey, we're all part of this one big invisible church.
Yes, sir.
And I think that's a bad idea for everybody who would say that. It doesn't matter if they're Orthodox or not. It's a bad idea for everybody who says that, because here's what happens. You're like, okay, we want to not fight and argue with people. I'm like, oh, okay, great. We're off to a good start. Let's not fight and argue. Let's not proselytize. Let's not do all these other things to each other. And some of these historical things that happen really bad, like, Calvinists were arresting women for cutting their hair. And, there's there were Lutherans that were praising the peasant wars and all the death over that. And then there were the Crusades. And there's been all these terrible things that happened in all these different groups over the years. And certainly the idea that we ought to see each other as the same thing in one way or another is a good idea. The problem comes when you start to try to paper over the differences. So, for example, if I'm an Orthodox Christian and I'm like, well, we have to have communion, we have confession, we have baptism for the forgiveness of sins, we believe in the Trinity. Well, if I'm going to look down the road and I'm going to say, hey, you're part of the church too, and you don't believe those things, right? Or you don't do the things we do, but they still get to be Christians to be part of the church. So what that does is it'll instantly, if you believe it, it'll create a lowest common denominator type of thought. Just like, well, I guess I don't have to do these things if you can still be a Christian and do that. That's right. And they're thinking, because you'll start to think about them as work as opposed to them as something that's saving you and something that's helping you and something you get to do. You'll start to think of it as like, oh, laborious. And so what happened in the 20th century is I think it totally eroded. It totally eroded the gospel message into something very like transactable and marketable, and it lowered the Christian life into like people like picking through it like a buffet of like the simplest or the easiest things to do, or what requires the least amount of work with the most reward. It was a very different way of thinking about it, as opposed to, well, what did Christ leave for us to do, and what did he pass on through the apostles, and well, we ought to do that. It doesn't matter what I think or what I feel like doing, right? Like I have to have some kind of objective standard outside of myself to change that. So anyway, that ecumenical movement, like really, I'm really careful not to paper over the differences. I don't want people, I want people to think that I think we have a lot in common. We like, you got the right characters and the right story in Christ. You have a very similar worldview to me. You have a very similar definition and presuppositions about how the world came to be. These are all things we can agree on and praise each other for. But when it comes down to like, well, okay, so, the Baptists just, at the Southern Baptists at their convention decided not to include the Nicene Creed yet after all these years, after 1600 years. And they rejected it under the phrase one baptism for the forgiveness of sins. Like, who would have known that the Baptists would reject it for baptism? And, so the problem is, it's like, well, are they the church then? And so you have to be able to draw a line somewhere, because it doesn't matter who you are. You can draw a bigger line, but you're going to have to draw a line eventually. Eventually it's like, well, are the Mormons in? Are the Jehovah's Witnesses in? And like, so a lot of these groups that believe the invisible church don't believe they're in. So you have the same problem, is that you have to say someone's in and someone's out. It's actually way easier for an Orthodox Christian to say it, because when other people are talking about salvation, they're talking about the idea that you had a moment in your life where you could believe somewhere, like you had some affection towards God, and you could believe that if you believed in Christ, he would save you, and that's salvation. The Orthodox Church doesn't think of it that way. So like the idea of saying there's no salvation outside of the church isn't a problem for the Orthodox, because there's not everybody in the church is saved either. It's like, and that God wants to save everyone. So there could be salvation for everyone. It's just that he revealed it through the church first, and the mysteries are held there. So there's been, I've had a great time talking to Protestants, because I'm trying to figure out like how much can you participate with them. Obviously, so there was a certain new Christian celebrity that invited us over to his house, who just moved to Florida, and he wanted to do communion with us. And it was like, basically a Capri Sun and crackers. And I'm like, no, we can't do your communion. Like, I love you, but like, I can't do that with you. It's not the same thing. So there's a line I draw when it comes to worship, but when it comes to friendship and it comes to like having a common goal in the world, or the fact that someone's going to let me come to their Protestant conference and be myself.
Yes. And
they're not going to make me do their thing. It's like, why would I say no?
Yes.
Why would I say no? I'm invited.
Yes.
I think there's beautiful things that we can learn from anybody. I mean, I even as a guitar teacher, when I was teaching guitar when I first started, like I learned from my students. It's like these people didn't know half as much as I did about. I learned from all these people too. Not that they are an authority over me or anything like that. So I think there's we can have a lot of friendship with people without papering over the differences, but also you got to remember that these Protestant churches, especially in the West, are being inundated by Orthodox inquirers. So they're going to have a little less patience for Orthodoxy at the moment too, which is all the more reason to be friendly when they're not being adversarial with you, for sure. Because there's the guy Gavin Ortlund online. He's always making these videos that are kind of like where he's trying to reframe the church fathers as supporting his reformed theology, and it backfires on him all the time. He hasn't caught on yet, but what it does is invite people to read the church fathers and realize they disagree with them on everything else too, and that they actually had something awesome, and they're very profound, and they're speaking about something very beautiful, and they're in much closer proximity to what the apostles handed off just on a calendar. Never mind just on a calendar, but there's a definite lineage where we can trace these beliefs back to the apostles. So it's actually backfiring against him. But I feel for these people because their jobs are on the line, what they built is on the line, and you're going to have to be patient with them. I think people just hammering people online who is just not a good plan.
Yes.
It's just not a good plan. So stop it. It actually makes it harder on me. For example, there's a couple of podcasts that won't have me on, not because of anything I've ever said or did. They want to have me on. It's because of the community that will follow me there will harass them. So there is a very small number of people. They say they're Orthodox, but they don't act Orthodox online that are hammering these channels, and they're actually doing the opposite of what they'd hoped would, which is they're not making their case. They're actually shutting down the dialogue. So
I'm so thankful you just said this. I'm sorry to jump in there because that's something that I'm currently dealing with. I'm kind of in the middle ground of the online Orthodox sphere, if you want to call it that. I'm trying to walk the royal path, the actual royal path. And I have had a few Protestants come on or ask some questions. And with me, I like to deal with them exactly how you just described, which is why I liked how you conducted yourself, and so did Jonathan, and so did Father Peter here's on Ruslan. It was direct, it was to the point, it was friendly, but it wasn't like passive in the sense where you just kind of like put something aside so you don't offend someone, but at the same time you're including them in the conversation so that they can ask questions, you can try to answer their questions, spark some interest so that they can kind of dig a little bit deeper and then find their way to the truth, who's a who, not a what, right?
Yeah. No, I think if people, okay, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, just real quick. If people want to watch a better example than me was Father Peter on Ruslan's podcast. He was, because people have a certain expectation of what Father Peter would be like in that certain situation. And he was probably different than their expectation. In fact, he was very effective. And so I would encourage people to follow and watch him deal with that and not compromise and still be totally loving in a general conversation and exchange. And that's also on Ruslan too, because Ruslan's being cool. Ruslan's being cool too. He's just letting people talk. So it takes both sides to get it like that. But if you want to know how to address that situation or that environment from someone who's obviously has a lot more rigor about these things than I do, watch Father Peter handle himself on Ruslan's podcast. I thought he did beautifully.
I agree fully 100%. And I think you guys did as well, because you guys all approach it from different aspects, all three of you. So no, I fully agree with what you said. We can't have this situation where you invite someone on like, oh, the ortho bros are going to come and attack me. It can't be like that. And that's not what our faith is about. And, but there are some really good podcasts out there. And there's a lot of great artists out there, and that's what we're trying to do here with our podcast, our little community, yourself as well. I could see that, and many others. I
appreciate that. Before you get to your wrapping up, let me just add one note for the ortho bros. Anybody who found themselves in a situation, like I found myself in situations like this early on where I was arguing with someone online or something like that. And okay, so here's the problem. Like, especially if you're coming through a Protestant background, you don't understand. You probably didn't get purification as part of your catechumen process emphasized enough. So the idea is that you're not waiting to stop sinning before you become before you get baptized and chrismated, meaning that like you don't wait to be faithful to your wife until you're married. Like you don't, like you start as soon as like you meet her, right? Hopefully you're already faithful to your wife you haven't met yet. That's the best case scenario. That's the best chance you have of building something good. But so the problem is, it's like all like people, you can't get illumination without purification. It's purification, then illumination. Otherwise, you're just getting information that's going into a corrupt system with corrupt passions, and you're going to use that information like a sword, like Peter, to cut the ear off the Romans. And what Christ is, he's really looking for more of a pacifist, meek. It can be bold, right? But the idea that you're not going to go and fight your way to the truth. But you're going to stand on those things. I think that's really important for people to know. So if you find yourself falling into that pattern, it's like, go back, like talk to your priests, like go give a confession. If you've become Orthodox already, if you're just a catechumen, please be quiet until afterwards. Like, so just go and figure out how to root out these bad desires in your life and the sin as much as you can, as much as God will allow you to do, and then let the illumination flow so that you have some sort of generosity, mercy, some kind of, lack of judgment for the people outside. And so you can really plead with them, because people don't realize if they're impure, they're going to argue with people because they're actually insecure about their own beliefs. They're like, they need other people to believe it. Right. And if they're really resting in that, it's like, no, like I found good food. Please listen, like here, take a bite. Like, it's a very different transaction. Love is driving one, and then your own insecurities are driving the other. So please talk to your priest about purification.
Oh, wow. I'm sending this to my church father, is Father Turbo. We've had a lot of conversations about art, all this stuff. I'm sending this to him right after I'm done editing it. He's going to love everything you said. It's great. Like,
oh, I love Father Turbo. Thanks.
He's great. He's awesome. And okay, brother, thank you for your time. I really appreciate this conversation. I would love to have you back on, because we could talk all day. I could tell.
Yeah, no, I like what you're thinking over here. I love what you're doing with your channel. It's awesome.
Awesome. Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
Have yourself a great day. And so thank you so very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
Adios.